Before the big reveal, here's a look at my testing. I've successfully called the fixed expenses and I've edited the column names so they're consistent with my plan. Unfortunately, I've got too many columns in my fixed expenses and the output is hard to read. So one of my priorities was to find out how I could display selected columns only. My trialing to display selected columns only worked successfully, but the resulting pandas are quite difficult to read. The trialing that I did allowed me to change my tables so that they're easy to read, and of course, I've shown this with a trialing slide. Now it's your turn. Make a copy of your variable expenses component and rename it All Expenses. In the main routine, we still need to ask the user how much they're making, and we're going to call our getExpenses function twice, once for variable expenses and once for fixed expenses. And you'll notice that when I call it for variable expenses, I feed in the quantity made. But when I call it for fixed expenses, I just say the expense type is fixed. I also have a temporary output area so that I can check that the code works. And it's a great idea to put in the total expenses in this area so that you can check that what you're doing is correct. If I scroll all the way up to the top of my code, you can see that I've gone from tabulate, import tabulate, and that is how we're going to change our table from hard to read to easy to read. If you don't have the currency function that we used in MMF, please go ahead and copy it and paste it into your functions area. Then, in your getExpenses function, you want to default how many to 1. Let's have a quick look inside my updated getExpenses. You'll notice that a lot of it is the same as what we had before. The big difference is that my amount is how many, defaulting to 1 for fixed expenses. And when we do have fixed expenses, my question on the cost is going to be how much in dollars. Our while true loop is the same as it was before. You need an if statement where if the expense type is variable, we can get the amount. And when we ask for the cost, we're going to ask the price for 1. When we ask for the price, we can feed in our how much question, which is going to depend on whether we've got fixed expenses or variable expenses. Then back in familiar territory, we add our items, amounts, and price into our lists. Outside the loop, we create our expense frame, and we can calculate the cost column. We can also calculate the subtotal by adding the items in the cost column. Once we've done the calculations, we can add currency to our amount, dollar per item, and cost columns. And then we can generate our expense strings. If we've got variable expenses, we're going to use tabulate to get a nice looking panda, and we're going to take everything in the expense frame. If it's fixed expenses, we're still going to use tabulate, but we're just going to grab the item and cost columns. Then, just like before, we can return our expense string and the subtotal. Please test your code and make sure that it works as expected. In the next video, we're going to integrate all of the code we've made so far into a base component.